Welcome to the Crush Your Sugar Craving Summit. I'm Michelle Jolly with Healthy Horizons Coaching. Today, we'll be interviewing Jenn Espinosa-Goswami. Jenn is a goal-getter, marathon runner, and chief motivational officer at Weightless. When not presenting health seminars in Minneapolis, you can find her online at weightlesschronicles.com. She holds a master's degree in leadership from Augsburg, is a member of the National Weight Control Registry, and her 100-pound weight loss story was featured on Women's Health, Prevention, and Reader's Digest. Let's welcome Jenn. Thanks for being with us today. So good to have you.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm excited.
Yeah, what a great story you have with the 100 pounds. That's a lot of weight. Yeah, so it sounds like you've learned a lot of personal experience going through that you can help your clients understand their needs and their struggles. So you know that. How did sugar kind of fit into that story, and why is this important for you to share with others?
Thank you for asking. So sugar is a really big buzzword today, and I am not one of those health coaches that will tell you to completely eliminate sugar from your life, because personally I found that doesn't work for me and it doesn't work for my family. So knowing that that's kind of the lens with which I view sugar, I'm not ever going to call it a poison or link it to cocaine addiction or things like that. I know there's studies out there that show that as a possibility, but I feel that we need more research around those studies to really make them applicable to a greater audience. In terms of how sugar came up for me, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and what that means is I was a child of the low-fat diet crazes. It was all low-fat. It was all reduced fat. Fat made you fat. We had fat substitutes like Olestra, which was horrible. And we had other things too. And unfortunately, when they removed fat from a lot of the foods that I was used to eating as a kid, they replaced it with sugar. Because if you remove anything from a food, it's going to taste bad. And food manufacturers are not stupid, and they want you to eat more of their food. So they said, we'll just add a bunch of sugar to it. So unknowingly at the time, because I was a kid and I relied upon the advice of my doctor, the parents of my life, they said, well, a Dairy Queen cone is still low fat. And so, there's a lot of sugar in a Dairy Queen cone. And that was the well-meaning advice from the adults in my life at the time. It's unfortunate. I also grew up eating a lot of processed foods, which I'm sure a lot of 80s and 90s kids are used to. Boxed mac and cheese, boxed potatoes, corned beef hash, the whole deal. I was rather very interested in things like Snackwell's cookies, those devil's food cookies. Oh my God, I was addicted to those. And I say addicted not in the medical sense, but in the I just loved them to pieces sense. And I would finish a whole package in one sitting. So sugar is something I'm not, I don't think it's evil, but I do know, having grown up in the low-fat diet time, that I ate way more sugar than I would have eaten if the low-fat diet thing was not a big deal when I was growing up. And I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I would take a spoon of sugar, like a teaspoon, and I would dip it into the sugar jar, and I would shoot it like it was a Jell-O shot. I mean, This was me as a kid, and that was definitely not a healthy thing to do, but I was so used to eating sugar that I wanted to take it in all its forms, whether it was a spoonful of sugar, whether I tossed it on top of my cereal in the morning. I didn't have a compass or a filter for saying no to sugar. Unfortunately, I was morbidly obese, which means medically I was 100 pounds over my ideal weight. So clearly it was not the healthiest lifestyle for me, but I saw no reason to stop when I was a kid, because kids don't like to do what people tell them to do. And I certainly didn't either.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that background. That helps. It helps people understand kind of what things you went through. So what do you think is kind of a big problem for Americans around consuming sugar, just to kind of, because a lot of people know it's not the best for us in different forms like fructose and things. And where is the biggest amount of sugar coming from?
Oh, that's a great question. So, and this is one thing I learned over the course of the year it took me to lose 100 pounds. Anytime you make a significant lifestyle change, which I did it gradually though. I didn't like eliminate from day one, like none of this or none of that. I didn't follow a don't eat this, eat that kind of plan. because I knew that that was not sustainable for me. And I just wasn't interested in extreme measures. And today, I think a lot of people are very much intrigued by these extreme measures. So on day one, they'll say, well, I'm going to eat zero sugar. I'm going to drink zero alcohol. I'm going to have no caffeine. And by day 5, they are just crabby and mean and nasty, and they just hate life. And I don't want anyone to start any lifestyle change with the idea of, this sucks, this is punishment, and at the end of this, I'm going to go back to my previous ways, because that's not really how it works. In terms of the foods that have the most sugar, and when I'm talking about sugar during this interview, I'm talking about added sugars. So if you're eating a lot of prepackaged meals, if you're eating a lot of meals that have coupons for them, which my family did, we were a couponing family because I'm the youngest of 4, the chances are good there's added sugars to those items. And it took me quite a bit of time to identify like what products I was regularly eating had added sugar to them. So if you look at the label, it'll say carbohydrates. It's listed under carbohydrates. And things have changed since I lost my weight, because that was 20 years ago. Now they have different categories for added sugars versus naturally occurring sugar versus fiber. So they kind of lump a bunch of things under carbohydrates, and that is a little confusing, because you're like, I don't really know how much sugar is in here, because added sugar means things that they add on top of what is naturally occurring in the food you're eating. So for example, if you're having milk, lactose is a natural sugar. Anything that ends in OSE naturally has sugar. But so when you look at the carbohydrates, you're like, well, how much of this is added? Like they put vanilla flavoring in there, or they put artificial flavoring in there, in terms of, how do you separate that from what's naturally occurring? So it's not always 100% clear which of those sugars is added, but now they do have to distinguish added sugars. However, food manufacturers are brilliant people, and they know how to sell their goods. So they will maybe say it's no added sugar, but there's a bunch of different things in there that naturally have sugar. For example, monk fruit or malt syrup or things like that. They may be able to not disclose that as an added sugar, because it's a natural form of sugar. So they can say it's sugar free. The things that I learned the most when I was transitioning my eating, the top foods, processed foods that tend to have a lot of sugar that you may not be aware of. This was a big learning for me, so I want to share this. There are 4 different categories that I break it down into. The first category is perhaps the biggest source of sugar for most people today, but it's drinks. So everything from juice to soda to some of those sweetened waters, because not all sweetened waters are sugar-free, or they might have a form of artificial sugar. And then alcohol. So I'm assuming most of the people listening are adults. So alcohol might be your top source of sugar. I mean, let's be honest about that. At the time I was losing weight, I was only 20 years old. So I did not have any alcohol at that time. And it took me quite a few years before I started drinking. But I would drink soda. I would drink Kool-Aid. I would drink 100% juice. That is still pure sugar. So all of those things, and especially if you're raising children, I have 2 beautiful daughters. I have a daughter who loves all fruit, including all fruit juices and anything derived from fruit. So she is naturally interested in fructose. Unfortunately, when you're not eating the whole fruit and you pulp it down into just a juice, that is straight up sugar that's going into your bloodstream, and your body processes it the same as it would white sugar. So drinks is that category that processed foods have a lot of sugar. So a good way to balance that, because again, I'm not a sugar-free person. I'm not pretending that anyone should be sugar-free. But to balance that, you incorporate either a protein or a fat while you're having that, so that your body processes it differently and slower, so that you don't get that sugar rush, you don't get that sugar crash. That's a good way to kind of minimize the effects of that. But another category, top category, especially for children. Remember, I was an obese kid, so it's really important for me to have the focus of how can we help our kids naturally eat better. Breakfast foods are some of the top foods that have sugars in them. Everything from the yogurt aisle. I mean, when's the last time you walked down the yogurt aisle? There are literally thousands of options in the yogurt aisle. And I can guarantee you almost every single one of them has some form of added sugar to it. Because plain yogurt is pretty tart. If you don't add any sugar to it, it's pretty tart. And most people don't appreciate the flavor of tart. So they sweeten them, and it could be everything from sucralose to stevia to monk fruit to syrup, or even just sugar and a combination of all of those things. So yogurt, if you're having yogurt for breakfast, but it's one of those Yoplait varieties that has up to like 36 grams of sugar in a small container, that is probably your biggest source of sugar there. Other breakfast foods, I used to eat cereal every day. I used to eat up to like 3 and 4 bowls of cereal as a kid, if you can imagine. My brother once challenged me to eat 5 bowls of rice, Cocoa Krispies. And I'm not one to step down from a challenge. So I'm like, you're on. I can do this. And I ate 5 bowls of Cocoa Krispies for breakfast, and then a full day of food. A lot of sugar in Cocoa Krispies. You know, even if it's the naturally occurring sugars that happen in cocoa, there's a lot of sugar in them. So any type of cereal products will have some sort of added sugar, whether it's malt syrup, erythritol. There's a lot of different sources of sugar that are being used in breakfast cereal. The ones that don't are your bran types, like bran flakes, wheat bran, shredded wheat, if it doesn't have the frosting on it, are less sugar, but they still have a little bit of sugar. Almost all cereal has some form of sugar in it. And then the other breakfast item, smoothies. You know, people will be like, I'm eating healthy, I'm eating a smoothie every day, but how much sugar is in those smoothies? If you gravitate more towards the fruit smoothies, like it has a bunch of mango and citrus and bananas, those are fruits that naturally have a lot of sugar. So if you don't, you know, balance that with a little bit of green, with a little bit of fat, with a little bit of something else, your smoothies might actually be sugar bombs that you're having every day for breakfast. So be aware, breakfast foods are a pitfall. If you're leaning towards the sweeter types of foods, it's added sugars in them, most likely. And then another category of the top foods that have sugars in them, sauces. Everything from tomato soup to marinara sauce. A lot of the tomato-based sauces and soups are full of sugar. So especially if you're going out to a restaurant, you want to get cream of tomato soup. It sometimes has more sugar than a can of Coke. So be aware that a lot of these soups and sauces are pre-sweetened. You can buy varieties that are not sweetened, but it might not taste good to you if your palate is used to the sweetened varieties. So be cautious. And then sauces. So things like barbecue sauce have a lot of sugar in them, usually brown sugar and maybe some honey and some other sources of sugar. They're still sugar. It doesn't matter if it's a naturally occurring sugar or an added sugar, your body still processes it the same and treats it the same. It's a form of carbohydrate. So barbecue sauces, Chinese sauces. If you love Chinese and Oriental cuisine and you buy one of those prepackaged sauce jars, like teriyaki is very high in sugar, very high in sugar. So anytime you get anything in a bottle, even salad dressings are completely full of sugar. There are some brands that are doing better with it today. If you can't make your own salad dressing from scratch, I like a citrus-based salad dressing with oil and some herbs. But if that's not your thing, that's fine. One of the brands I really enjoy for salad dressing is Salad Girl, and it doesn't have a lot of added things to it. Plus, a lot of them are dairy-free, which is important to me. But salad dressings can be a really bad source, especially if you're buying it at a restaurant. Like Wendy's has some really good salads, but a lot of their dressings are pomegranate, lemon poppy seed, and they have a lot of added sugars to them. So just be conscious of that. Not that you can't have those things, but that could be a top source of sugar for you. And then the last category of the top foods that have sugar in them are items that are labeled as sugar-free. Because it's a trick, right? You know this, Michelle. It's a trick. They say sugar-free, but then you turn the packet over and you look at the label, and it says OSE that. So an item that ends in OSE is some version of sugar. That's one of the aliases of sugar. It could have some version of syrup. It could have some version of stevia or stevia extract. It could have some version of whatever. If it's labeled sugar-free on the front of the packet, chances are good it has a bunch of sneaky sources of sugar that we may not know the name for. And even, there's up to 40 or 50 aliases of sugar. Every day, the food manufacturers are coming up with a slightly different variation of an alias. So, you might know the sneaky ones today, but that could change like 5 years from now. So just be aware, if it says sugar-free on the front, that's a somewhat misleading claim because it probably has an alternative version of sugar that is not naturally occurring that they're adding to sweeten up the item so that you actually enjoy eating it. So those are the top processed foods that I've dealt with and I continue to educate my clients on, because you wouldn't believe it, right? You could say, well, I ate healthy today. I had a yogurt for breakfast, I had a salad for lunch, and I had tomato soup for dinner with a sandwich. You know, those things could be a high amount of sugar without you even being aware of it.
Yeah, yeah, so true. And then, yeah, the sugar-free stuff, a lot of times they put in high carb potato flour or this or that that turns to sugar anyway, that you think you're eating sugar-free, but yeah, it's carbs too. Yeah.
Anytime someone removes something from a food, be very cautious, because just so good they put something else in there that you do not want to eat.
Right. Yeah. So, getting to kind of the people you work, the clients you work with a lot. So super moms, you say on your website that you help them ditch the diet and escape the gym, so they don't have to sacrifice life they love. So what is kind of the secret how that might work? Or what's some things you can tell us about working with people?
What I've found in my experience with clients is it is often when a woman decides to become a mother or is raising young children that she becomes even more conscious of her own habits.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, it's not good to smoke while you're pregnant. It's not good to drink alcohol while you're pregnant. But when your baby is born, there are also some habits that your children are watching you do. And you are one of the biggest influencers of what habits your children pick up. So being that role model is a really important thing, which is why I have a passion for moms, because we become more conscious of those things. We become more concerned about what habits we're modeling for our future generations. So that's why I'm very much into that. And because I'm raising two girls as well, body image is a thing. And unfortunately, we live in a very public society where social media will tell you what you should look like. And there's a lot of images out there that may not be realistic for the average American woman, who is a size 14 or 16 these days, is the average size of the American woman. So, you know, having all these unrealistic images of what you should look like and how easy it can be to get there. It's not easy to get there. It took me a year of hard work to get there. And I do feel that it's important for people to understand that it's about the long-term game. So all these extreme diets and all these things are not helpful to people, but understanding that moderation is key, and that there's a process to making moderation happen for you. And I like to work with my clients in particular, like what works for them at the stage they're in and with the resources they have available to them. So for example, if I have a client who is couponing and budgeting and has very limited funds to buy groceries for, and she still has to feed her kids food that they will enjoy eating and not throw in the trash, then I will work within those and educate her on what is the first best steps to take, because it's, you know, it's a long-term game, and our palates do change over time. Some of the things I really enjoyed eating as a kid, today I would refuse to eat. Like Fritos, chili cheese Fritos used to be my favorite thing in the world as a kid. I will not eat it today. So, but it took me years to get to that point of retraining my tongue and my taste buds. The same will be true for children, especially if you raise your children to have a variety of foods in front of them. They will never have that relearning process that I had to go through, and a lot of people have to go through when they get through lifestyle change. It's a tough thing. And another focus I have is I am a big believer in cooking from scratch. I know a lot of moms of my age perhaps don't like to cook, never learned how to cook, grew up on processed foods like I did, and they're intimidated by learning kitchen skills. But it's the best thing you can teach not just yourself, but also your children, because they will also grow up knowing how to cook. They will also grow up knowing what's in their food. They will be able to educate their children and your future grandchildren on what is healthy and what is not healthy and how to create that balance. If you don't teach them, then they will be subject to whatever food manufacturers are telling them is right for them. So I feel that that's the best skill that anyone can learn when it comes to a healthy lifestyle, is teaching your kids to get in the kitchen, having fun with them in the kitchen, exploring different tastes and sensations and cuisines. That is the best way to model those habits that you really want your kids to take to the future generations.
Yeah, good stuff. So important. Yeah, to get our kids kind of seeing us doing this stuff and also, yeah, learning so that they could do that in the future. Um, yeah, great stuff. One thing you help people with is becoming more mindful when they eat, like you kind of mentioned, with trying new tastes and flavors and things, so that they could eat more intuitively, and instead of, yeah, like you mentioned, no, not restricting, but kind of figure out what works for you and what your tastes gravitate toward. Uh, so how does that work? Like, I would have, my husband would probably say he's going to listen here, but well, why can't I like pizza and ice cream. Why can't I just have that? That would be my diet that tastes good to me. So what might you say, how does that work with your clients like that?
Well, there are a couple of different approaches to that depending on how open a person is to making change really happen. So, for example, if you run across someone who says, I love pizza, and it's not pizza if it's a cauliflower crust, it's not pizza if there's no cheese on it. I feel that. I've been there. I've gone everywhere from, fully meat loaded pizza with all the meat varieties to vegan pizza. I mean, I've gone through a lot of different transitions in my own life too. And personal taste is personal taste. Like, it's really difficult to change how you enjoy food. And I don't ever want anyone to stop eating their favorite foods. So what we focus on instead is what to add more of. So
Yeah.
obviously you can't keep eating pizza and ice cream all day long and still reach your health goals. That's just not going to happen. However, we are very fortunate to have exposure to a variety of swaps. I like to call them smart swaps. So personally, I've never been into the cauliflower crust pizza, but do you really need a deep dish pizza, or can you go a little thinner with that crust? Do you really need to add all of the hamburger and bacon and sausage and pepperoni, or can you replace that with some vegetables like some peppers, some tomatoes? There are lots of smarter swaps you can use. Is there a way you can make homemade pizza? This is not an option for everyone, but one of my favorite things to make for my kids is homemade pizza. And they help me roll the dough out and they're putting some elbow grease into it. It's really fun. We're throwing flour all over the place. So again, it's about putting the fun back into it. And research does show that the more you incorporate your family into creating the meal, the more likely they're going to eat it. So if you have someone, your kids picking food from the garden, they're going to be excited to eat that food. They're going to be excited to sauce up that food and roast the vegetables and make them really beautiful and put it on a pretty plate. So, incorporating your entire family and also being willing to work within their bounds. For example, I have clients who come to me and say, well, my husband doesn't eat anything but meat and potatoes. So I'm like, that's great. You can keep eating meat and potatoes, but can there be one day? I like to do themes for different meals. Can there be one day that's meatless Monday? Can there be one day that is this? Can there be one meal that maybe is just for, fruit and something else? Like, is there some way to incorporate one meal at a time? Some of these swaps. And when I talk about swaps, it could be everything from eating more vegetables to eating less sugar to eating more whole grains to incorporating more nuts to eating more legumes like beans and peanuts and things like that, to cooking them a healthier way. So going from fried foods to maybe air fried foods, or going from steamed vegetables, which to me, steamed vegetables are disgusting. I don't like the taste of them. I never have. But like, if you roast them, they suddenly taste delicious. So finding different ways to prepare foods that you used to hate and being open to exploring that.
Yeah, yeah, some great ideas. Yeah, a lot of different things that people can try depending where they are, kind of meeting them where they are on their journey of health. So kind of, you mentioned a little bit about how you eat, but what is your family's food plan look like? People might be wondering, and is everybody on the same page? Do you struggle with? Because I know some families are, like you said, dad eats this way and mom eats this way, and yeah. So how do you do that with a family?
Yeah, when possible, I want everyone's family to be eating approximately the same thing. However, my family doesn't have all the same tastes, just like many families. I don't necessarily think my children are picky eaters, but I have my younger child who likes the meat and potatoes kind of approach. My older child likes the fruit and fish kind of approach. So, we have some days when, maybe it's not their favorite thing to eat. How we address that is I don't have specific meals planned out for each meal. what I do instead is I focus on a theme. So for example, Taco Tuesday. Taco Tuesday might be beef tacos one week and it might be fish tacos the next week, you know, so we rotate. The theme remains the same, but we rotate the types of ingredients and foods we're using within that. And that also helps us be budget friendly. So for example, beef is really expensive right now as a result of all the COVID things. So we're not eating as much beef, which is also a healthy direction to take. Or like if it's a meatless Monday, then we might have edamame or tofu instead. And I have one child who likes tofu and one child who doesn't. Okay, something on the side will be something this other child enjoys. So for the most part, we serve our family family style dishes where there'll be 3 or 4 different things on the table, and everyone will like at least one other thing on the table, and we expect everyone to try what's there, but we keep to certain themes so that I don't always get that question doing most of the cooking in my house. I don't get that question every day of what's for dinner, what's for lunch.
Yeah.
You know what the theme is today, here's what we can do.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to do it. Yeah. So we touched on also the sugar substitutes, kind of like the stevia, xylitol, and all that, and monk fruit and everything. How does that work in the body, and is that really better than processed sugar, or is it still kind of teasing your body to think that the sugar is coming and it doesn't really come, and so it still does the insulin release?
Yeah, so sugar is interesting. When possible, I always choose naturally occurring types of sugar, especially I'm a big baker. I love baking. My daughter is an award-winning baker as well. She's won for cupcakes and a variety of other baked goods. So we've been doing that for a long time. What I have found, especially when it comes to baking, is that some sugars work better than others because texture and rise are very important when you're baking. And I have not had a pleasant experience with stevia. I don't like the aftertaste of stevia. Some people are not as sensitive to it, but personally, I don't like it. It's harder to get the right rise on your baked goods when you're using stevia. I also am not a big fan of monk fruit and coconut palm sugar because those don't add the right element of sweetness that I'm looking for to get the right balance in what I'm cooking or making. So those are things I traditionally don't use. Agave, I don't like to purchase it because it's pretty expensive, and it's not something that my family enjoys either. So our favorite sugar substitutes, if you will, they're still sources of sugar, are 100% pure maple syrup. And I can use that not just in baked goods, but I can use it in sauces. Like we do a lot of Asian style sauces in my house. We have a roasted cauliflower recipe that is absolutely delicious. And it's just sriracha, maple, and black pepper. It's the most delicious thing you'll ever have. So, and we also like to use things like honey because my daughter is a tea drinker. So honey is her favorite sweetener for that. And local honey is best, of course, because it helps you with antibodies and protecting against certain things that are local to you. Molasses is a sweetener that we use a lot, especially because molasses cookies is one of our favorite things. I like to make muffins and breads with molasses because it has a very subtle undertone of sweetness, and it is a high source of iron, which having a lot of girls in my house, incorporating more iron is important for us. And then we always have some sort of pureed fruits for both baking purposes and, you know, those applesauce packets, go-go squeeze and whatever. We almost always have that around, or dates, because it's great to substitute for baking, to reduce the fat, to have naturally occurring sugars, and it's also a good snack. So, you know, multi-purpose, anytime you can use the same thing for multiple purposes, it's a good thing in my book. And those are the top sugar swaps that I use, especially for baking, cooking. I always have them in my house. Those are staples in my house.
Yeah, that's good. I try to do that too. I've kind of found with those, you kind of have to have a recipe that already is designed around that product versus just trying to swap it yourself because it never works out right. So yeah, look for those recipes.
Or even another thing I found that works really well. So if your recipe calls for like 1 cup of white sugar, you can use half a cup of white sugar and then maybe a little bit of honey. And it will still be plenty sweet enough, but it'll still be less sugar. So that's another swap I do pretty openly. I reduce the sugar by half and sometimes add a different source of sugar. So that's a good little swap too.
Yeah, that's a good idea. People, trying to slowly transition.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end, but I want to make sure, I think we've kind of gave people a lot of options for little things they can try to get things started on reducing sugar or switching their eating habits to a little healthier. Is there anything else you want to add in that area that they can do, or anything we haven't talked about yet?
This may sound counterintuitive, but I did want to bring this up. So the American Heart Association recommends that women especially have anywhere between 5 and 6 teaspoons of sugar maximum per day. The way I see it, if you are actively adding a teaspoon of sugar to your morning coffee, to your tea, whatever, that is the right way to take sugar on in your daily eating, as opposed to just buying something that has a bunch of sugar in it. If you're making most of your food from scratch, or a good portion of it, if you're being very cautious of what sources of sugar are in the canned and processed goods you're picking up, then you're already 2 steps ahead of the game. And when you're intentionally adding sugar, that's okay. It's just when you're unintentionally taking in sugar, just be conscious and aware of where those sources come from, and you will be a healthier person.
Yeah, yeah. Good thoughts for people to leave on. But we also have, you're giving everyone a free gift. Um, Kind of a titled Tired of Your Tasteless Protein Cookies and Cardboard Like Sugar-Free Muffins. You have a ebook that's some healthy treats with kind of the ingredients with the swaps that we've talked about. So that'll be, yeah, great ways for people to try new things out, new recipes and things. So everybody can just enter their email below and get that free gift. I think you'll enjoy those recipes. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody
So,
enjoys sugar-free desserts. I mean, you give the stink
yeah.
eye to anything that's labeled sugar-free or low sugar. You're like, that's not dessert. These are desserts that I promise and guarantee you will enjoy them. Your children won't notice that they're lower sugar. It will be fantastic. It's what I use for my own family.
All right. They're already kid tested and approved.
Approved, mom approved.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for being with us today. It was wonderful getting, yeah, different perspective on sugar and getting it a little bit out of your diet. And yeah, so thanks again for being here. And thanks everyone for watching. It's been great on the summit so far. And stay tuned for more videos tomorrow. Thanks, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye.